in 2004, the National Tennis Association changed the color of all tennis courts from green to blue. And it had to be green.
Oh,
and so
I bet you didn't know that going in, or
no,
think of that.
I didn't. And every time I'd go, well, then we
courts.
also had tennis matches.
Yeah.
And so I would run to a location, very excited and be, immediately let down. It's like blue. So we looked into the cost of resurfacing a tennis court, and that proved to be prohibitive.
How much is resurfacing a tennis
No,
court?
it's a lot.
It's
They
a
said
lot.
no.
Okay.
They said no. So the producers said
Sure.
no. So we found a house, sweet man that owned this house out in Sherman Oaks.
Gotcha.
So then that was their tennis court.
Thank you for joining us. Before I kick off this, and all jokes aside, who here is an LA native? Okay, so we've got quite a few. Who here lives on the east side? Who here lives on the west side? Who here lives in the valley? Okay, so that we can kind of get a good sense of where everyone is from. I'm going to kick this off with a sort of broad question for everyone. As we just saw on the clip there, LA is a pretty big part of all of these shows. Maybe Claire, if I could start with you. What makes LA a special place to film in?
Hi, everybody. I'm the designer from Nobody Wants This. First of all, thank you for coming, and I hope you enjoyed the show. Or if you haven't had a chance to watch it yet, please check it out. And LA, I would say, is special because because it's just the crew, the studios, the history. That, to me, I think is probably the most important thing. And one of the things we tried to do on Nobody Wants This is look at sort of the city as a whole. We didn't try and keep it in one area. We really tried to sort of show all sorts of areas, like East Side, like you mentioned, kind of think about what was iconic to LA and how people view LA, but also then go a bit further and really explore lots, maybe what hasn't been photographed before or not as commonly.
Matthew?
Similar. It's so diverse, and it can have so many different looks. So that's one thing, and it is the home of Hollywood. Mm-hmm. So it's great to shoot here and be able to go home at night.
Yeah. And Suzuki, you're a native.
Yes, I'm a native. I grew up here. And I have to say, waking up in my own bed is one of the priorities, and I love that. But aside from that, I feel like I've never seen a show done well that's replicating LA elsewhere. And I feel like there's like a vastness to LA, and there's like a difference in the lighting, and it just has this kind of amber glow to it. And I feel like we tried to capture a lot of that and also shoot all the kind of diverse areas of like Beverly Hills to Windsor Hills. So yeah, I feel like that's important.
Kier, what about yourself?
Also an LA native, and so it's special to me to be in my home city and to be able to kind of see these locations and places that I grew up going to or go to now on screen, and I think also connected to the music. There's so much music culture in LA, and to be able to kind of connect those things with the music that we get to use in the show and reflect that back, together from the actual place, where the music came from, maybe even the areas where these artists live, and make their music, gives that really deeper connection to, the tie-in of the music in the show.
I agree with that. The music and the sounds and the sights, and one of the things editorially for me is being able to tell stories in the place that I live. I mean, I'm from Chicago originally. I came here and living here and seeing the stories and the people that are here, that to me is really special to express it, because people have a very specific idea of what they think LA is, and I don't believe that they know what the true heart of this city is. So it's really great to express those stories.
My version of LA before moving here was very different to my version of LA after you, and you find, most of us probably came here for the same reason if we weren't born here, and seeing it on screen is pretty special, and getting it right is even more special. Claire, Nobody Wants This. You mentioned East Side. Shout out, Los Feliz particularly. That was a fun show to watch as someone who lives on the East Side. That will not surprise you that I live on the East Side of town. it's all location based. Was that correct? Is
Yeah.
largely,
Yeah.
you didn't have to build too much.
No, so the decision was made. It was very much talked about, sort of, if it was supposed to be, all over LA or what, it was definitely a big discussion. And ultimately, what it came down to was, we're trying to tell the story of this young couple who are, vibrant. They're in the early stages of a relationship. And it really just suited being out on location and being able to go to the trendy spots like the bars, the restaurants. So that it sort of just helped that decision more than anything. And as the writing went along, I don't think it would have helped us to be. I mean, it would have helped the crew, and I'm sure, as many of you know, it is hard doing a location show. But really, for the show, it gave us a valuable opportunity to really show off the city. I mean, as I say, because I've been on shows where really you're on a soundstage so much, and I think you almost come a little bit complacent. Whereas when you're in the city and you can really just kind of take hold of it, embrace it, I think it helped the show, and I say it was a big discussion of whether we should do that or not. It meant a lot of scouting, and we were not complacent in the way that we had many options, and all the way through to the finale, we were trying to figure out where things were. So it was great. It was a good opportunity to see everything.
So when we see them dine in Marate, that's Marate. When we see that's
yeah,
a real
absolutely.
Yeasty Boys van.
Yeah, absolutely. And like Bakari, we went again. It was a discussion of showing up, helping show this relationship, which is so. I think Adam and Kristen do such a great job with these characters. Like there's so much great chemistry on the screen. It's very believable. It's very real, and I think that so. We needed to translate that. It wasn't, we needed to be matching their vibrancy with what we showed.
It's also, as you mentioned there, so Kirsten's character and Adam's character, so she appears to live in sort of Beechwood Canyon vibe. He's very clearly in Eagle Rock, shout out Vidiots and Waltz. And then obviously the parents live in Sherman Oaks, which is a pretty accurate description of a relationship like that, right?
Yeah, I think so. And it offered the different architecture as well. I mean, we did Beechwood Canyon vibes. It's more like, I guess, again, probably we're more Hollywood than that's where we started, and we were trying to find a really interesting architectural place to again be the backdrop for her home, and I think we achieved that just and again kind of bringing in those old Hollywood vibes. It's a very old building that we ended up filming in, and that was great too because initially when we looked at Beechwood Canyon, it wasn't realistic to film there, but again we took the essence of that and wanted to show it.
Yeah, there's too many Harry Styles fans in Beechwood Canyon these days. And then Temple, how was that? How you have a number of scenes in temples, and then a huge bat mitzvah scene as well.
Again, just all about it being real. This was Erin Foster's story, obviously, and her sort of journey that's reflected. So we wanted to be true to that, and she obviously had very strong opinions about making sure that we were relaying that story accurately.
Yeah. While we're on Nobody Wants This, Maura, let's talk about the editing side. What was that like for you? Seeing LA, you're cutting this, you're lingering on certain shots. How was
very specifically? We set out to make LA a character. And much to what she was speaking to about shooting on location, it really did help shape the performances because it was a more intimate. The actors had a more intimate connection because they weren't on a soundstage. It was a house or it was a restaurant. And it really gave, I think, lended itself to their performance a lot. We specifically went out, too, to shoot B-roll that was pops of LA that you don't normally see. It wasn't aerials of the Hollywood sign. It wasn't the Capitol building. We made sure to make it look like you were walking down the streets of LA. You see a bus. We have buses here.
That's interesting you say that because those are the shots you see in a lot of things. Some palm trees and Capitol Records building. But so when you what were you shooting B-roll of?
So we literally had a discussion on what we want the interstitials to be because you do need interstitials to weave some of the stuff together, and a lot of it sometimes comes from stock footage, which is it's a little generic. So we wanted to make sure that we shot it a little bit off speed, so it had a little dreamy quality to it. We did angles that you don't normally see, and we did jump cuts in it as well to make it feel like if you were walking down the street and you look and look and look, you might see a bus pass. So it's almost like you're seeing LA from a ground level. And that lends itself, again, to these two characters, making them feel even more real as you're seeing the city through their eyes. And so it becomes a larger version, especially with all the cultural differences we have in LA. I mean, he is from a Jewish family. She is obviously a Gentile. So that cultural difference, too, we wanted to show in not only the temple scenes, but like the Rock Club House and how they relate to each other editorially. So
By making LA a character, does that make your job harder, easier, just different? How does...
Personally, I think putting the thought and time into doing that makes it a richer project, because you're not just relying on standard feels. It gives a third layer to this. So you have our main characters, you have our supporting cast, but then you have this beautiful backdrop to it, and it I think connects the audience to the world even more.
Was there a scene, was there something that you were like, we need to linger on that to show that this is the real LA?
Editing, you never want to you don't want to hang on too long.
Sure.
I will say the quintessential scene, and it happened in the pilot, and it was reminiscent to one of my first times when I moved to LA. I went to this backyard party, and it was in the hills, and you could see the lights across the city, and it was really striking to me because I come from Illinois. It's flat. So we see hills, we see lights. So when they have the party, the scene where they're having dinner, there's this backdrop where you just see the LA lights. And to me, it was just so romantic and set the stage for what the show is going to be.
Good. Well, look, let's talk Forever now, Suzuki. Mara Brock Akil has talked about, the show being a love letter to LA, much similar, I'm sure, to Nobody Wants This. How did you translate that into the production design of the show?
It's so interesting. I think we're all trying to do love letters to LA to keep filming here.
Yeah.
It's so important to start showing everything. But for us, it was a story about a boy growing up in Beverly Hills and a girl growing up in Windsor Hills. So one had money, one didn't. One came from like a nuclear family. The other one basically, raised herself, but her mom was still loving and cared about her. So it's a very different story in the fact that, yes, they're on opposite sides of the track again, but they meet, they fall in love, and then we see their relationship growing, and then we explore LA with them. Like one of my favorite scenes is with the bus and the subway, and they're traversing across LA, and we're seeing like Koreatown, we're seeing the Wiltern, we're ending up in Pins in the Valley. So we're really exploring the city. And that's kind of what the bus system does, and we kind of underrate that. Nobody really takes the bus, but they do, and it was kind of beautiful. Again, we have one of their first love-making scenes up on, Mulholland Drive up there, and you're seeing the city lights, and it's kind of this romantic moment in time. And again, shooting LA and the love letter to it is like, there's so much history here. We shot at the Mamba Academy, which in itself was, emotional for a lot of people. And Farmers Market, where I grew up, my dad took me there. They go there. And, the Santa Monica Pier, we did like an entire prom there, so we really brought a lot of life to LA, I think.
Yeah, you certainly did. It's funny you mentioned the Grove, and there's a Cantor's scene, I think.
Fairfax, they go shopping on Fairfax, which you don't see often.
And then that Santa Monica Pier, it feels like Santa Monica Pier actually is, as opposed to sometimes you see it where, I've seen it in movies and shows where you're like, that doesn't really feel like it feels.
Yeah, so what we did is we had to create a big prom moment. We wanted it to be like Beyonce's Homecoming, but we couldn't afford that. So we basically had a day to set up an entire neon festival of lights. So we were very organized, dropped off neon, set up this huge party, and that's kind of where their prom was. And then after hours, they let us explore the rest of the pier and put them into the Ferris wheel and the roller coasters and all that stuff. So again, that was a very romantic moment.
Yeah, you mentioned Keisha, the character. You said Windsor Hills, Baldwin Hills, somewhere like that.
Windsor Hill.
Windsor Hill. And then obviously Justin is in Beverly Hills. How do you're shooting in those places so we can see that, but I guess there's certain things that you have to do to make it clear that what that means to people who don't necessarily know the difference between those two areas, right?
Yeah, so I actually grew up in Beverly Hills, and my hat's off to Matthew for creating that period of the Menendez brothers. I went to high school with them.
Oh, well.
So he
Christ,
did a
this-
great job of old Beverly Hills. They're a little bit younger, but yeah. But I built the house. We found an amazing house in Beverly Hills. The outside was gorgeous, the inside not so much. So I built an entire set. We invited the owner afterwards, and he was like shocked what the interior looked like. His kitchen was like 1940s. Ours was state of the art, modern. And then, they did want to move, and he's like, "Oh, can we just bring this over when you're done?" I'm like, mm-hmm. And then we built the triplex that Keisha lives in, and we had some fun with that. Like, we really brought LA into that. It's like the old bathrooms, the old kitchens. We've all had apartments like that. And the fun part was that I think went a little unnoticed is that our theory was that she has an apartment, it's rent control, her mom doesn't have money to like put up posters and make holes in the wall because you won't get your deposit back. So the concept was that she created her own wallpaper. So as she went to school, all the sites that we saw on the show, we took pictures of, and she made Xeroxes of them and then put them up on her wall. So by the end of the season, her story is intact. The whole wall is full of all her photographs. And it's kind of like a diary to her life with Justin and also our show's progression. Like when they go to Martha's Vineyard, we had some of those up. So it's like a diary.
That's a nice touch. I feel like we should do another 30-minute panel on you and the Menendez brothers. I feel like we have some unanswered questions
Such
there.
a good job on Old Beverly Hills.
Oh, that's a whole. We'll come back to that, I promise. Kia, you mentioned the music on Forever. It's very specific. 2018, largely hip hop. Where do you start with something like that?
Yeah, I think, it's partly the characters, right? They're teenagers, they're in high school. What was the music that they were listening to at that time? And what were the things that they would have been hearing, in the world, in the city? Maybe things that would be on the radio or things that they were, in the community, and things that they were sharing with friends. And of course, there's a moment where they share music with each other early on as they're starting to, form their relationship. And then it's also, there's a lot of influence from their parents, and especially in Justin's household where his parents are playing music a lot of the time. And so we, took that into consideration as far as like, he's not listening to the same music as them, but he's probably influenced by their knowledge and the kind of, different things that they've been playing for him over the years. And then, of course, the city and what, music was in LA and what music was coming out of LA at that time. And it was a really rich environment where there was, a lot of really incredible artists that became huge household names.
Yeah, we can talk about it. So these are things like Tyler, the Creator, Anderson .Paak. You have them in the show, and they were the big names in 2018 that were sort of...
They were, yeah, and they were just kind of really coming into their own at that time and becoming really big stars. SZA, can add to that list. So, that was just an incredible movement that was going on at that time in the LA music scene of the, this kind of crew of kids and people that were creating this new kind of form of R&B music that was influenced by jazz and alternative rock, and they were kind of fusing all these different sounds together in this new sound that was really blowing up.
Did that make it easier or harder? Because you have to be very precise. And I imagine some artists are like, okay, we know you need us, in a way that maybe if you had a more broad...
This is true, and I think because of the timing or setting that time, we want to make sure that we're representing those hit songs that people know from that time, and we're setting it up right away. Like in the first episode where we have Migos, which isn't an LA artist, but it's an artist that was like a huge at that moment. And so we start off, the house party that they go to with a Migos song. And so, we have Travis Scott in the show and a lot of big artists, but it was important to really set that time and place. As far as like what those kids were listening to and letting people know like this is the time that we're in.
And in 2018, you were working on an LA show. You were working on Insecure.
That's right.
How similar was that?
It was, and that helped for sure. In that I had been in that world and spent a lot of time there, and you know, something that when I think about like where those artists were at that point in 2018, those are artists that I had been familiar with, a big fan of, putting in shows for even years before that when they were really young, and kind of seen them grow and become more and more popular over that time to a point where they were, you know, much more expensive to use in the shows that I was working on. You know, not just, you know, partly because of us helping them get their start and placing them in shows, but also like they just caught on and the community embraced them. And that's why they're valuable and important to have in this project.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to Lyle and Eric Menendez. Matthew, is this you driving North Elm Drive, going up and down it to sort of get inspired on the production side rather than the murderous side, I imagine?
Yes. You know, the house, which obviously is a character where they lived, we needed something very specific. Beverly Hills home, it needed to have a motor court. The front door needed to lead directly to the room that the crime happened. And it needed a pool and a guest house and a tennis court. And you think that would be an easy find, but actually it proved to be very difficult.
Yeah.
So for the house, I built the house on stage.
Gotcha.
And the exterior was a beautiful home that we used in Fremont Place. The pool and the guest house was a second location in Hancock Park. And then the tennis court, in 2004, the National Tennis Association changed the color of all tennis courts from green to blue. And it had to be green.
Oh,
And so...
I bet you didn't know that going in, or
No,
think of that.
I didn't.
The
And every
tennis
time I'd go... Well, then we
court.
also had tennis matches.
Yeah.
And so I would run to a location, you know, very excited and be, you know, immediately let down. It's like blue. So we looked into the cost of resurfacing a tennis court, and that proved to be prohibitive.
How much is resurfacing a tennis
No,
court?
it's a lot.
It's
They
a
said
lot.
no.
Okay.
They
yeah.
said no. So the producers said
Sure.
no. So we found a house, sweet man that owned this house out in Sherman Oaks.
Gotcha.
So then that was their tennis court.
Was your inability to find one that referenced it was because things had changed, or the people maybe who lived there didn't necessarily want to let you use it, or did that not just exist anymore, the house that they...
You know, we went up front when we were scouting. The house was the first thing that we were looking for with location manager. And we had to just say right off the bat, this is what it's about. You know, we couldn't say too much, but it's about this. It's about, you know, are you...
You can't fudge it when it's serial
No,
killers, right?
we cannot
Yeah.
fudge it.
Yeah.
We need to kind of get it all out.
Yeah.
So, yeah. that-
And one of the other fun might not be the right word, but you recreated Spargo. You recreated the original version, right?
So Dominic Dunn, who came back and stayed at the Chateau Marmont, which also we built on stage, he wrote articles for Vanity Fair.
Yeah.
And they were very pointed and a certain take on the crime.
Yeah.
And when I started doing research, because I was alive, you know, back then I was in high school, and I remembered the crime. But when I started doing research and finding out more about the case, I realized that what I really knew was only Dominic Dunn's version. So anyway, he would go to Spago. He ran in, there's a scene we have, a couple of scenes. He's having lunch. He runs into Leslie Abramson, the lawyer, the boy's lawyer. And I wanted to shoot at the original location, which is now a commercial production house, and the other side is a barber shop. But, you know, it has those sort of iconic windows that it used to look over Tower Records and the old Carolco building. And I was like, we can't cheat this. We've got to go there. So fortunately, the location team, we were able to secure it and revamp it.
Yeah. And this isn't your first Hollywood. You literally did Hollywood, the
Yes.
Ryan Murphy show. You got an Emmy nomination for that. Congratulations.
Thank you.
How? So you evidently like building LA. That's.
I do. I mean, the Hollywood was a great dream job, you know, to sort of recreate Hollywood in the 1940s, and you know, in the early turn of the century, L.A. and the birth of the film industry, so many people were coming, and there was all these architectural influences that were developing. So in Hollywood, I really tried to capture like a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and I think we still do that, today with the Spanish houses that you're mentioning in Hollywood, or the mid-century, or there's great architecture here.
I mean, the word authenticity is said so often in television, but you can smell when something doesn't feel right about a city. You've got very specific examples of how did they get from there to there in that sort of time, right? And what you guys do is sort of paramount to that. We've seen this sort of big, obviously since the fires, the stay in LA. There does appear to be a momentum to want to stay in LA. Now, putting aside just going back into one's own home, can you sort of talk about the challenges and the advantages of shooting here? There's a real, as I said, it feels like we're in a moment that LA is quite critical.
I in regards to the show I worked on, which took place in Beverly Hills, we had a couple of scenes outside of Dr. Azil's office, and his office was at 435 Bedford, which that street is too contemporary. And I really also wanted to shoot in Beverly Hills. I didn't want to try to cheat South Pass or another location because I thought it's just not going to work. Beverly Hills, the street over, Camden, had this sort of 2-story brick kind of federal medical building, which looked like 1952. And so I thought, let's shoot here. Shooting in Beverly Hills is very hard, as I'm sure you found. You need like 100% signatures, which means you choose a location. You have to make sure that in a certain radius, everybody agrees to it. And then I was told at any point they could pull the permit. So it makes it a little insecure going in. You're trying to push for a location. And I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it does.
But there's the payoff of being able to use the location for what it's supposed to be. Some areas are harder to work in than others.
And to everyone, are you sort of enthused? We've seen Karen Bass came out this week, I think it was this week, and we had the councilman last a few weeks ago. There does seem to be this drive. Are you encouraged, Suzuki, maybe ask you, that actually more can get shot here, that it might be made marginally easier?
I do think that's great that we're getting the attention, and it seems Newsom and Karen Bass are trying. That's the tip of the iceberg about permitting. There's a lot of other issues. One of the hardest things when you're asking how hard it is like everything's changing in LA so fast. Like, I mean, growing up in Beverly Hills, I don't recognize it anymore. It used to be like, honestly, like a small town, and people tease me about it, but it was a very different place. And now nothing really matches anymore. Like, some of our vendors are all closing, the prop houses, and like even all the art supply stores are closing. So I feel like we've got to bring back, for the small businesses too. It's not just about us. Like, we helped so many of them, like the flower shops and all that stuff. So bringing an incentive that's really competitive. And I know I hear Rob Lowe talk about how great it is to send everybody, 100 Americans, to Ireland, and it's much cheaper to film there. But the truth is that none of those people need health care, right? None of them are having health care. They have national health care. So that's where you're saving the money. So by even comparing that to us over here, like, okay, great. So if we give up all our fringe, yes, it'll be cost equivalent. But I don't think that's great either.
I don't think Rob Lowe was loving having to go to Ireland, though, by the way.
Nobody's saying it's so much cheaper.
It was absurd. He was making the point that it was a bit absurd that you have to fly in that many people. But to Suzuki's point, are you encouraged, or do you think we're just still in that very early stage of making?
I think there's still a lot that needs to be done, right? Everyone like to bring filming back here. I mean, I obviously moved here, and it was a long time ago now, but because of the film industry and the experience and like the quality of the filmmaking that was here, and I think we've lost a little bit of that, and I think there needs to be more incentive to bring it back. And like Suzuki said, like the small businesses, I think it's obviously been a very tough year for everybody, but to you can't. This crews are still the best, I think, here, and like just to be able to find things as well. Like you go, talk about Ireland, yes, like or just even the one thing I will say with most of my career has been like half-hour shows, and we have to move at such a quick pace, and it's 5-day filmings, and like sometimes even on Nobody Wants Us, we were still figuring it out a few days before, and if it wasn't for LA to be able to call the prop houses, to call the, you know, all the different vendors, and them understand the time constraints and, you know, to a certain degree the costs that we were under. I mean, I think we really have to bring it back to where it should be.
Yeah. You've worked on other LA shows. I'm just curious in terms of how Nobody Wants This, Forever, and Menendez, sort of favorite LA experience in this job. Like, I imagine you telling that story makes me think you asked for something pretty crazy and were able to get it. Is that?
Yeah. I mean, but again, I think it was the understanding of what we were trying to achieve, and I mean the finale episode we did a bat mitzvah in a, and again it was trying to find the florists, trying to find the event companies who were able to respond really quickly, and again, you can't beat it when they understand the timeline we're on.
Matthew?
I can't think of a specific example, but I will say that the understanding of how the industry works when you are out dealing with vendors and dealing with, retail spaces, that people get it. And so it can come together very quickly, because I too am on shows where you have to move super fast. And it feels really good when everyone else kind of jumps on and you're able to accomplish it. Yeah. And I've done location work, and sometimes it's not quite as fluid.
Yeah. Well, look, I hope more production does come back here, because honestly, I don't really want to move to Atlanta or Albuquerque or send me home. So please give it up for our panelists. We've got Claire, Matthew, Maura, Suzuki, and Kia.